Sean, welcome to the show, mate.
Great, man. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited. It's 10 o'clock here. The kids are down in bed, so that could change at any moment. I hope you've got some good editing skills because we might have to chop in and out as the little fella cries. But, mate, very grateful for the opportunity.
Mate, the family's grown since I last saw you. That's you and Jamie, just the formidable force of parenting.
Well, I'll quickly let you in on a little secret here. This could be exclusive this week, and drop this here first on your podcast. We're very, very grateful. We've got two beautiful little kids. We've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And we were potentially thinking and open to having a third. And thought, why not be a sucker for the punishment? But I was fortunate enough earlier in the year to get asked to come over and present at the UKSCA. I remember getting the email drop in my inbox, and I looked at my wife, Jamie, and said, "Can I do this?" And she said, "Mate, you're taking us." Well, so okay, no worries. So we all hopped on a plane and scooted over. And it was at that point, Louis, after 17 hours of travel, we decided we are not going for another child. No way. It's not getting any bigger, mate. That's it. We're done.
So
there's
the
only
exclusive.
so many hours of walking up and down the laneways of an airplane you can do in 17 hours, mate. So I think that was our decision made. So I love them dearly. They're beautiful, but it's a bit chaotic.
Mate, no doubt. I've got a bunch of friends who have now having kids, and I'm one of two. 3 just seems, I think you can keep your eyes. You've got 2 eyes for a reason. You can see 2, but third would be
again,
carnage.
A bit of a cliche. A few people have said it to me, but you play man-on-man defense when you've got 2, but you have to go to a zone. When there's 3 of them, you have to sort of figure out, mate, you're outnumbered. So that's when you start getting a bit more tactical with your gameplay. So now I think with the career and the business, and I guess with some of our aspirations, and maybe with the energy levels of kids, maybe it's a little bit of payback on myself. I do see a bit of myself in both of them. That might do us, and I think we'll just focus on expanding ourselves in that realm and give these ones as much love as we can, and hopefully they can pick up where we leave off one day, hopefully.
Mate, love it. So for listeners that would not potentially have come across you and our relationship, so we met in Adelaide when I was a part of an academy out there. Coaches that I was working with were working with you, and we drummed up a relationship through you training me originally, and then eventually me coming in and working a bit in your gym when you first started at PEAQ, when you first launched it, which is now expanding. You're getting a new facility, which we'll touch on in a bit. But something you'll be proud of as well, mate, is that I have now actually gone back into the gym. I had a hiatus. I had a bit of a hiatus at the gym where I spent, I would say, close to 2 to 3 years out of a gym facility on a regular basis. And I did that based out of, I think COVID played a role, especially when I was in Adelaide during the pandemic. But I also then came back to the UK and bought some weights for in the living room, and just was doing all my workouts on my own, self-working myself. And I've gone back into the gym, and oh my God, it's game changing. And I'm kicking myself. And the reason why is because it's nothing to do with the workouts, the equipment, what's there. It's being around people that are doing something that is challenging themselves. And you know that every person that's stepping into a gym is trying to improve themselves, regardless of their ability, regardless of where they're from. They are trying to improve themselves on some way, shape or form. And taking in that energy and taking in that has been much more of a mental energizer than it has been a physical energizer. And I physically feel good because I'd had some physical issues where I was in a lot of pain. They are clearing up because of I'm now back lifting weights like I was when I was playing, being a pro athlete. And yeah, mate, we're back in.
Unreal. Well, I guess there's a few things to sift through there, mate. First of all, and I'm not just saying this to blow wind up your ass, but very, very grateful for everybody who's supported us and helped us along the way. And, you were there in one of the, very early stages of what PEAQ was. Our facility in Adelaide is PEAQ. It's a PEAQ. It's an acronym for Periodized Evidence-Based Applied and Qualified. I've spat that
I
out a
did
few
not know
times.
that. I did
There you
not
go.
know that.
I'm not just dyslexic. So I'll probably, you did work for us maybe back then. As you know, that's certainly been a learning curve. Is I guess the development of our staff and getting into understand the true roots of where PEAQ comes from. But you were there in one of our very early stages and phases where we're just sort of growing and finding our feet. And we still do continue to make things up, but we're really making things up at that point in time, and didn't have a great deal of members. But the energy that you brought, we really enjoyed having a male presence in the mobility side of our yoga as well. And to have somebody with your sort of credibility and experience on board was amazing, and has been a part of this journey. So I really hope that as you see us expanding to our new facility, that you take just as much pride in it, because you're one of those building blocks, mate. And I can't wait to have you over here and pumping it out. Number two is absolutely. I followed the journey. I've watched the stories, and although sometimes our communication can be scattered by or dispersed by months between each other, I still get excited by logging onto my stories and seeing the great man's pipes out, just pumping it out in the gym every day now, which is great. And then moving into, I know you sort of talked about a lot of the ailments that you said are starting to ease up. I'm a massive believer in, movement and movement for medicine, really, as you are as well. I think that resistance training provides a wonderful stimulus. Your body is an amazing adaptable machine. So providing it with a stimulus to be able to adapt to and to make stronger, or even if it's not just from a muscular point of view, it might be sharpening up your neuromuscular pathways, increasing your coordination, increasing your self-confidence. And as you said, I probably would concur. I don't think traditionally all gyms have that environment that you're talking about. I think maybe some gyms are created better than others. And I'm not just saying that for the sake of I'm a gym owner. We do pride ourselves on our environment. But there certainly can be some toxic environments where it's really aesthetic based and to be competitive, and a bit of sort of like a dick swinging contest, for like a better sort of analogy. But certainly if you find the right environment, the right people training, like it's incredible. It's a community. And I think that's what's helped to separate us and assist us in growing through, a stage of the world that's been pretty challenging for most small businesses. And don't get me wrong, it hasn't been easy by any means. But it's helped us to maintain connection and hopefully create a space where you come and you feel like you are part of one big team, no matter what you do, no matter what your background is, your age, level, ability, size, shape, gender, whatever it might be. You come in and you feel like you're part of that footy team. I refer to football a lot. Aussie football, that's my sort of traditional background. But you're not trying to wrestle a bench of a big juice monkey. People are working together. They'll jump in and have supersets and those sorts of things too. So I couldn't agree more with that concept, but maybe isn't universal from some of the experiences I've had.
Yeah, it was actually one of the main drivers of why I didn't go back into the gym when I came back from Adelaide, and I'd been going into your facility, and I will be leaving links to all of your socials and website for people to really go and check out how you've set your place up, because it is unique. It really is unique how you've set it up. And I'm really excited for what you're going to be creating. And if you're taking that style and shaping it into an even bigger facility, it's going to be wild. But I had that energy that I felt in your place. Then I came back to the UK, and I had my gym that I had been going to before I came over to Adelaide, and I didn't want to go back to it because it was traditionally a bodybuilder's gym. It was walls lined with mirrors. You couldn't catch a conversation with anyone because they were already having a conversation in the mirror with themselves. So It was something that I was like, do you know what? This doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be what I want out of a place. Now, ironically, I've started at this gym, and then I'm about to move. I'm moving in a few weeks, so I'll be going to a new gym. Yeah. I'm literally going to. I'm just outside of Brighton now. I'm actually moving into Hove, which is right next to Brighton. So, getting into a little bit more hustle and bustle, and being in around it there. So there's a bunch of gyms there, and I've got a couple of friends who go to some over there, so I'll be sort of picking and choosing and trying to join and see what's got the right community. But now I know what it is that I want, right? It's not just the equipment. It's not just the to have the top-notch stuff that's there. It's the people around using it. Do you feel welcome? Do you feel judged? Do you feel like you end up... I felt actually, if I was in the bodybuilding gym, right, I felt like I was taking on a persona from everyone else, or I was turning into a person I didn't want to, because I was sort of saying, well, this is just how things are done. So I even sadly felt myself judging other people, right? You're in there and you're going, oh, they're not working that hard or doing this, that, and the other. And you're like, well, this is not creating the type of person that I want to be, because it's not the environment I want to be in.
Often in those environments, you get drawn in, or you lower yourself down to the standard that's around the place. And again, we see that sort of throughout sport, throughout business, and throughout work and throughout life. It is very easy, and that's why often it's the minority of people that rise above that, because it's probably human nature for us to want to make ourselves feel a little bit better, potentially by potentially criticizing others or other things, or externalizing potentially some of the things that are going wrong, or whatever it might be in the world.
Here's something for you, actually, just whilst you're on that, just whilst it's coming on my mind. One thing I find that's really interesting when you go into a gym like that with bodybuilding, that you so often see someone go into the gym probably with the intentions of getting fitter, getting stronger, maybe not really have a massively aesthetic goal, but then probably 6 months to 12 months later, they're competing in some form of aesthetics competition. What is it about those environments? It's something about them that I feel draws people to that. It really makes them engage with that competition side, I think.
It's a great question. I guess it can be very dependent on the person as well. Sometimes it might be as simple as giving them some sort of purpose to work towards. Because, for example, if you are one of those people who doesn't have a sporting goal, doesn't have a goal they want to go and run around with their kids or their grandkids or whatever it might be, because that, often that's a functional goal that we see from people if they don't play sport, then you sort of end up in this routine where you're exercising for the sake of exercising. And maybe it's a suggestion from somebody, or they see somebody else do it and go, well, actually working towards something might actually help me to stay a little bit more accountable, and they get sort of sucked into this world of getting leaner, getting bigger.
It's not health. It doesn't seem, it's not healthy.
Absolutely. Well, here's the thing. I was talking to somebody a couple of years ago, and they were saying in all other sports, for example, your goal is to, on game day, on competition day, be at your healthiest and be at your prime for performance. You want to have lots of energy. You want to be vibrant. You want to be sitting perfectly on that bell curve. Whereas, unlike probably any other sport that I can think of off the top of my head, bodybuilding is the complete opposite. You're probably at your weakest, at your most run down, at your most dehydrated. You go through, layers of dehydration. Maybe boxing to an extent in a way, but they'll obviously rehydrate and refuel afterwards. But those sort of combat and aesthetic sports, they really break you down right around competition sort of phase, which is reasonably unique for any other sport across the world.
Plus the exogenous ingredients that you might be taking as well.
Some of the pharmaceutical help, depending on again, I won't say any names, but as I was coming through university, exactly the same as you, I went to a sort of more traditional bodybuilding gym. You often head into the bathrooms. There might be some needle packets that were sitting in the in the sink, like accidentally left over or whatever it might be. But I was talking to one of the guys there who was competing, and don't get me wrong, at that point in time, I thought about the idea too. I sort of had this weird phase where I realised I wasn't going to become a professional athlete. I was sort of in the semi-professional space. I'll never ever say that, Jamie distracted me from being a professional, but I met Jamie at the time, so I'll tell her, hey, if we didn't meet, you never know where I could have been. I sort of been a big spud. I would have been worse. But just around that time, I stopped playing sport, like sort of professionally or properly, with the intent to become professional. So I did more gym work, and I was talking to one of the guys there and asking him what he did, and I asked him if he was natural or not. He said, "Oh, mate, anything is legal in competition up until 6 weeks out." So sort of he was implying that he could gas up as much as he wanted to, and then sort of deload it for 6 weeks and deflate a little bit, but enough of it would be out of his system so that he didn't test positive to A, B, and C. And I was just sort of taken aback. I was like, I had an inkling, but the way it was portrayed so casually, I was like, man, this is not right. And that definitely was a bit of an eye-opening moment and steered me back down to getting stuck back in the footy a year or so later.
Yeah, and I think the training for a sport and training for an activity and a reason, a function is ultimately so much more vital for transferring outside of that sport, because those goals that you set, they're so much more functional. And like you said about you're priming yourself to perform on the day. When you're an athlete, you're training yourself in the gym, in the facilities to be in the best shape you possibly can be when the competition comes. Now, reality of professional sport especially, and sometimes amateur sport, more often than not, is that you're never really 100%, but it's can you create an athlete that is adaptable and in the best possible place they can be for where they are at in that moment. Whereas all of these other sports, these aesthetic demands that people might be getting in the gym, I see it as fairly robotic and linear, and it doesn't have much movement here or there. It's very non-functional for every day. I think if you see people constantly isolating movements for like a bicep curl, whatever it might be, it's not really how the body moves in reality, how it moves in space. And you might find that, you might be growing something and making it look good, but if the body is then demanded to do something extra compared to what you're training it to, it may not. Whereas a sport, you're training it in multi-dimensional, you're training it in many different ways, training it to be not only fit and able, but robust.
When I was going through that phase as well, sort of dabbling it very early stages of my experiences in the gym, there's probably two things that really stood out to me. I think back to myself and go, oh my God, like I sort of can't even believe that was a phase of my life. But one thing was, it was, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's other sports that are as well, but it was really all consuming in the fact that I remember, I would have to have my chicken, rice, and broccoli every 3 hours, and that I'd be pissed if I wasn't in range of microwave, so I could sort of heat up my food, and I'd go over to Jamie's parents' place for dinner. Wouldn't eat the potatoes because too many carbs, and they were just like, who's this weird bloke? Like it's just that certainly had a greater impact on your life, sort of outside of just physically, in what you were talking about as well. So that definitely stood out. And then I just found that then led into potentially not being able to concentrate in, for example, like the lectures. At the time I was trying to learn about sports science and the human movement, I'm just sitting there a little bit brain dead because of maybe coming down from the pre-workout that you just inhaled earlier that day, some Jack 3D or Chemo Rage. You're just chewing on dry broccoli, and human physiology is just going straight through one ear and out the other ear too. So, I'm really glad that I sort of went through that and experienced that. And the other thing I was going to say as well is you sort of have this idea that as you get bigger and musclier, that you will become a more attractive human being. That's sort of like a generalization. But I tell you what, all it did was just other blokes would just comment, oh, bro, man, bro. Like, bro, you're so sweet. Like, what's going on, bro, man? Are you benching? Like, that's always, it's like, there's never any time that there's any female that commented and said, oh, you look amazing because you're like wider than you are tall.
The male admiration outweighed the female admiration.
It's literally blokes saying how good you are.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So anyway, that was a phase. That's one chapter that we'll sort of flick through pretty quickly.
Yeah. So one thing that I know you pride yourself on as a person, as a business, is continuously developing and upskilling. And I would also add in there, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that almost proving wrong what you perhaps knew before, which I think is a real big part of what academic literature shows. And the physiological space is moving in a very fast rate. There's always something new coming out. It's a very contentious topic as well, because some people hold a format or a way in which to train tight to their chest and believe it's the one thing. What are perhaps some of the methods or styles in which you started off training people in, but then as you developed, you started to let go of and then maybe molded into some new ways of training? So essentially a short way is where you were to begin with, and perhaps what have you changed to now?
Oh, look, it's probably a shopping list, to be honest with you. And one of the reasons why we're so intent on this at the Performance Centre and with my staff and just as myself as a professional is the industry is ever moving, that there's always new evidence, new research, new training methodology, greater understandings about anatomy and physiology. So if you were to ever find one principle or one set of exercises that you love and thought fixed all the ailments in the world, then you get left behind pretty quickly. The other thing is having a really clear idea that as an industry that we are so far from perfect. If you look at every top level of sport in the world, no matter if you're working in the Premier League where you're paid millions of dollars a week, all the way down to semi-amateur Australian rules football and everything in between, that there are still hamstring injuries, there's still ACL injuries, there's still tendonitis, there's still Achilles ruptures. So as an industry that prides ourselves on trying to mitigate the risk of injury, we need to understand that we still are not at a point in which we are perfect and say, hey, this fixes or mitigates everything. We should just implement this. If that was the case, then everybody would have this one program, and essentially all of sport would purely come down to a skill contest, because we'd all be the same fitness, we'd all have the same strength and power and resilience and all those sorts of things. So we're still way off it. If anything, to be honest with you, certainly as an industry, we are improving athletes' capacities. Their physical capacities are massively improving. So if you look at, let's say, for example, GPS data in most, if not every field-based sport, you probably will see a trending upwards direction of volume and distance and high-speed running that's been undertaken within the scope of a game over the last decade.
Has injury moved with that? Has injury moved with that trend?
Well, I was just going to say, with that, also injuries have increased.
Right.
So, not at this probably at the same speed as what we've increased the capacities of the game, but you would expect with how much we know now that injury rates should be trending down. They're actually slightly up in the last few years. We think that that's mainly due to because of an increase in output, and as a species, we're still adapting to these intense bouts of performance that we're exposing ourselves and our athletes to. But yeah, we've still got a very long way to go. Other things that people start to talk about having some sort of impact would be the volume of travel that occurs. Obviously, the world is getting a more and more accessible place, so competitions happening probably more rapidly all over the world. You look at a basketball schedule, for example, like the NBA is just wild. Even in the WNBL, and we work in the moment, we've got 3 games in 8 days. Luckily these 3 games are at home, but often you might play here in Adelaide, then head off to Melbourne and then go to Townsville, all in the scope of in that short time turnaround. The introduction of artificial surfaces is a massive one in the Premier League and the NFL at the moment too. So figuring out how we adapt to those, and do we change our footwear, do we change our prescription of exercises, do we deload, all these sorts of things. So probably a long-winded version of saying, like, there's just so many moving components of performance, and the world is ever changing. We're still so far off it. So please, if you are an S&C coach or somebody who wants to get into this world, just continue to learn. Take your humble pills and understand that you might look at your programming from 5 years ago. Oh my God, I was way off it. And just ensure that, you are always doing your best to learn from others.
How do you go from, okay, you've got something new being presented to you, a new piece of evidence of a way of training. Just for the sake of ease, we'll just say it's muscle strength, for example. How do you tussle with releasing what you've known and what you've done, and then adopting a new form and trusting that it's going to work with no experience yourself in doing it, and you're just kind of trusting the evidence that's there? That's something I actually struggled with as an athlete personally, was being presented with a new way of doing something and having to let go of how I'd done something in the past. And that it is quite literally a bit of a leap of faith. I felt that you're going, oh, okay, I'm trusting this and got to trust the process here.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's sort of where the art of coaching comes in. So you've got sort of the art and the science, and there's two sort of very separate components. And I think that probably from my sense, I feel like that my art of coaching is probably a little bit better than my science of coaching. In terms of deciphering when and where to implement it, probably first, if you can, if there's a way, find a way to sort of experiment and dabble a little bit, either with yourself if you have nobody else to. We're in a very fortunate situation at the private facility that we can play around with some different principles, exercises, programs, technology, those sorts of things with maybe some of our sub-elite or even our general population, just so that we can get a feel. What does it look like logistically? Are we going to derive results from it? Those sorts of things too. Once you have played around with it and are confident, that's when I would start to transition into more of those sort of professional gigs that we work with. But as I said, if you are somebody who doesn't have the luxury of having access, grab your brother or sister or mum and ask them if you can, do some triphasic training with them or whatever it might be, in order to make sure you get a feel first. Unless you're super confident, and you might have an opportunity to say, hey, we're in the off season here. I've heard about this German volume, which is going to give it a go. So I'm just going to jump in the deep end and see whatever happens. And if the players get super sore from it, we don't get a huge amount of benefits. And, maybe that's okay because it's off season. It's not going to impact our performance. But yeah, generally I would try to at least implement it elsewhere beforehand. Or, talk to people you really trust in the industry who have rolled it out. But always I would say, go through the literature and the research with a fine-tooth comb. Always look at who are the subjects that this research is being undertaken on. Is it general population? Is it elite athletes? What's the environment in which it's being undertaken? Is it in a practical real-world environment? Or is it in a laboratory? Or is it a sports institute where, they have every environmental factor perfectly catered for? Once you have a clear understanding, sometimes even, who is funding the research, because that can also impact the outcomes as well. So the research is really flawed. The other thing I'm sort of realizing now as well is that for those people in the academic world, and I don't get me wrong, I'm going to say I love literature and research. I read it all the time, but I have become a little bit more skeptical about a lot of different things about it, for the fact that there are huge pressures on academics to get out a certain number of papers per year. So maybe the due diligence isn't always, as titles should be as well. Just for the fact of we need volume to keep getting funding and credibility and accreditation and all these sorts of things too. So there's a bit of a sieve you have to sort of work your way through. But I will still always keep my eyes on sort of what's happening for sure.
Is there anything that's come out in the last year or two that you've adopted that you've really liked? Some form of training that you've gone, this seems to really be working quite well?
Yeah, good question. I think maybe as opposed to like a training, like triphasic training, let's say, for example, so I said that before because that was on the top of my head. So it's sort of where you break up the exercise into its three major phases: the eccentric phase, in which you're lengthening the muscle under load; the isometric phase, in which there's a pause or a hold; and then the concentric phase. So there are multiple ways you can do that. You might, for example, if you have some time, have a 4-week block of programming where all of your main exercises are eccentrics only. And then you might do another 4-week block in which all of those exercises are now isometric only. And then you do a 4-week block where you really lighten the load and move it, the weight as fast as you can. And there is some evidence and research there to show that enhances explosiveness and strength power. So we've been playing around with that definitely in a facility. In terms of some trends of the industry, we start to see, it's funny, and I take it with a pinch of salt, but you find maybe every 12 months, there's a muscle or a movement that the industry has said, hey, this is a seriously underutilized muscle or movement. We need to make sure that we're ticking this one off. So, for example, I would say in the last 12 to 18 months, everybody's been really pumping up sort of a foot ankle joint. And definitely with my basketball, we use that heaps. Everybody's been smashing tib anterior work. So everybody's doing dorsiflexion till the cows come home, which I think is great that we're starting to identify that. Is that going to solve all the world's problems? Absolutely not. But it's a nice little addition to the program, particularly if you're working in sports where there's lots of XLs and DCLs. I'm seeing more and more recently, in terms of a conditioning perspective, we are always being super intent with volume and then speed and then volume of speed and zone 6 running. Acceleration has been another big one. But probably your ability to decelerate is gaining a greater emphasis recently. So people realizing the link between athletic potential, your ability to put the brakes on really quickly and be able to sort of propel out of that. So looking at what are the parameters that we're looking for, what does good or nice deceleration look like? Can you objectify it somehow by putting markers on, looking at joint angles or looking at, video vision or getting people to decelerate on a set of force plates and those sorts of things. So that's been, I guess, another sort of growth point. And one that I don't think is too mainstream just yet, but one that I'm certainly starting just to look into because I think there's so much more to it is fascial training and trying to sort of think about not just muscles, tendons, ligaments, bones, but our fascia, connects everything to everything almost. There's different densities of fascia. It's quite a coordinative approach to fascia training. So just trying to sort of wrap my head around how maybe you can incorporate that in a more traditional sense. Like could you do a back squat where you want to increase your force output, but then superset that with a backwards to forwards lunge with a holding a pipe overhead while twisting at the same time or something like that. Like these are things that start to play in my head. I haven't actually delved in this realm. I know there's a guy in Adelaide. I'll have to give him a shout out, True Function, who I went and had a meeting with. He's doing a lot of it in his studio. He's started to be popularized a little bit through some of the basketball community as well. Something that I certainly still don't have my head around fully, but I think there's some context. I think there's some substance to it for sure.
There's Tom Myers, his book Anatomy Trains, that goes a lot into, it's probably one of the, I guess, early adopters of fascial training, especially fascial stretching. And
yeah, I've got actually him on my list. So I've got him, I've got Cal Dietz and some of his work as well. But you've delved into that room, from like a stretching perspective?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess for people to really have an understanding to what we're talking about here, fascia is essentially, if you think of your muscle, if you think of a piece of meat in a shopping bag, the meat is your muscle and the shopping bag is the fascia that is around it, and it's this huge connective system throughout the body that is hyper connected. I mean, Tom Myers, the fascial system has got, I think, 5 trains that he essentially puts it through, 5 lines that it's through. I'm going to butcher it if I keep going any further, but it essentially, a lot of the training that I did with it was what you would almost from an outside look at like ballistic stretching, right? What people would say is ballistic stretching, but it's done with a huge amount of intent on, for example, if you were doing like a forward fold to touch your toes, right? You are trying to reach out to touch your toes, but you are doing it with your toes pointed towards your shins, like to the max, like really extreme, and then your chin tucked right into your chest so that your entire back line of your body is stretching. And then through it, you're doing these very like bouncing, very swaying movements that are they're longer than what I think a ballistic stretch looks like, where it's It's like short, sharp, and pulsating. These are sort of longer and winding, and they're almost as if you're trying to reach and then reach and then reach. And I did it for a seriously long time. And I tell you what, it again, anecdotal, but it felt like it made a difference. And I say that because it's interesting you talk about basketball because of the deceleration, the movement, the high explosiveness of it, the movement as well being very dynamic and very multi-directional. The same is sort of said with cricket, right? You need to have, as a bowler, you got to have slamming into the ground, you got to hyperextend knees and whatever is going on with whatever technique you've got. And I think that element of training is kind of left behind a little bit. People initially in the S&C world of, say, cricket, and I'm only going to talk from cricket, is that it was like muscle will equal speed. Yeah. And I think the stretching and the elasticity of it was left behind. And a part of the training that I did with the fascial training was elasticity and plasticity of the movement. So there would be one day where you might do a more holding side of that. So you going into this, again, forward fold, everything's really lengthened out, but you're holding it. And then the other day will be elastic. It'll be actually this bouncing movement to almost replicate the elasticity that you want in your sport or your movement. And that's what you're kind of looking for in, say, like bowling. You're really looking for someone to be strong but elastic, so they've got lag in their movement so that you can increase speed. But yeah, it's interesting you say that. It's because it's a very big topic.
I think as well what really appealed to me is just thinking about those more advanced athletes where you think let's say, for example, if we say Joe Root now, how long has Joe Root been playing cricket for?
Probably started when he was, what, 6?
At the top of his game.
He's been there nearly probably 15 years.
15 years. So let's say, for example, do you think that you are squeezing more out of the orange if you increase his back squat by 2.5 kilos, or
100%,
if you increase his channel movement jump by 3 centimeters? Like, maybe, but for those people, and again, we sort of thought about this in the context of some of our, we've got AFL players over here who've been in the system for 17 years. Are they going to become better football players or better cricketers or better basketballers if they're increasing their strength? And so those diminishing returns, you sort of almost feel like going around in circles to an extent towards the latter part of their career where they're aging a little bit, they're a bit sorer. Yet they sort of get stronger in the off season, and then you end up just managing with isometric training in season because their tendons are a bit angry and those things too. What about if we increase the coordinated, capacity on their end, and that might be the way that you can really progress the back end of a really experienced athlete's career who maybe is strong enough. It goes back to that question: how strong is strong enough?
I find it interesting with people like LeBron James, Djokovic, Nadal, Federer to an extent as well. And the sports we're talking about there are ball sports. They require a high level of skill. This probably wouldn't apply to maybe an Olympic sport because you are quite literally moving from A to B in the fastest, most efficient way you probably can go. But when you add a skill into a sport, it changes it entirely because you can get away with some loss of physical attributes at the latter stages of your career because probably your experience, your skill level will keep you on the park as well. So LeBron James is an interesting one. Again, with Djokovic, the level at which they're keeping themselves fit, the level at which they're keeping their bodies attuned. But I think I've read an article, LeBron James is, they're holding, keeping him on the bench a little bit longer, or they're minimizing the amount he's on the court. I know the schedule's crazy. So again, they're clearly monitoring something there, and they're making sure he's not going to damage himself.
Yeah, well, a couple of things with that and with him. I think potentially in maybe years gone by, he might have just had complete games off. But what the NBA has done in recent times is they have sort of put rules together because they were seeing that it was affecting ticket sales. So let's say, for example, and my geography of America is not fantastic, but let's say he's in LA, and if he has to, if they've got a game against the bottom team across the other side of the country, generally they'd rest him for that, and the fans would know that because it happened before. That would be his off week, and he'd be fresh and ready to go, and that would impact ticket sales and reviews and all those sorts of things. So the NBA is saying no, as an organisation, here is what we're quantifying as a star player. These star players must play minutes. So what they're doing is having to manage those minutes over a certain period of time. So he will now have to fly over to the other side of the country, but might play 2 minutes per quarter. So a really interesting balance of player load management and really entertainment. To be honest with you, I guess I'm going to quickly diverge, but it led to, I guess this leads me to another really great conversation I had with somebody again at one point in my career. They said to me, what industry are you in? I said, straight to conditioning. So sure? Yeah, like sports science. And nah, you're in the entertainment industry. Like that's what you like. You're trying to get an athlete better or keep an athlete on the park more to entertain people in the stands or on TV. Yeah. Okay, that's fair. And then when you hear about decisions like this, obviously that's 15 times above any level that I've ever achieved. But it makes complete sense to me now, and I definitely view our role slightly differently.
That's so interesting. That's a big thing that I think people need to get their heads around. Is sport is not a sport industry. It is an entertainment industry. Yeah. Especially when you start getting around the conversation of equality in sport. If sport was to be paid and funded based on effort levels, there would be sports that would surprise you as to how much they would be funded. But it's not. It's funded on how many eyes are watching that sport. It's the same reason why my pay packet is considerably lower as a professional cricketer than a Premier League footballer, because more people are watching Premier League football than they are watching county cricket. And even at international cricket level, it's purely entertainment. It's the same way you look at a new film that's coming out in the cinema. The films that get the most tickets sold, the most people through the door, those actors, actresses, they get paid the most for that because they are what they've created. It's entertainment and people are paying for that. Sport's no different. And that's so interesting that someone said even the S&C side are in that industry. And it's totally right. Like I saw so many S&Cs in our team that would want to do things a certain way. And if they could have it their way, then they would do it a certain way. But because of we wanted to get a certain player on the park, or we needed to sort of get them out to up sales or improve, just play better, whatever it might be, then corners were cut, you would say, like they weren't done to the textbook. And I actually think this leads quite nicely onto something that I highlight here, which was you mentioned about the art of S&C. And I think that you said the art and science of S&C. I'd like you to dive into that, because that's especially the art side of it. Because I think far too many, maybe early on, start off by wanting to be scientific, show their credibility through the knowledge that they know. But then the reality of S&C is far, far different. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about like what you mean by the art of S&C.
Yeah, well, it's definitely something that I've learned along the journey. I don't know if you, and sort of mentioning along that same example you talked about, you've heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you've got no experience and you think you're up here, and again you're speaking anatomically and you're using all this physiological terminology and trying to bamboozle the athlete you're working with just to sort of that. So usually you can tell straight away the credibility and the quality, and probably just I'm not going to say their poor quality, but maybe just the experience or the maturity level of the coach that you're working with based on the terminology that they used. But essentially, the art, I would always say, is your ability to get athletes to buy in, your ability to communicate and describe and provide context as to the reason why you're doing things. It's a bit of a cliche in our realm, but you could have the most perfectly written, science-based, rep measured, load measured, distance measured program that you want to roll out. But if you don't have to get your athletes to buy in and undertake that consistently, that's going to derive poorer outcomes than somebody who has an average program, but they have this ability to connect with their athletes, They get it out, like they have their athletes hanging off at every word. They're undertaking the programming consistently. You're always going to go for option number 2, the less perfect but more consistent programming, and that's down to the art of it, really. It's just how can you communicate? Do you have the ability to adapt? Can you understand that logistically there's going to be a beautiful way to do it, but it's not always going to be that way. So, for example, I love the ASCA, the ASCA, and I love Flinders Uni and UniSA and all those wonderful, accrediting organisations that have come through in order to get money. But if you were to ask them, okay, what elicits speed? Let's say, okay, a 1 to 12 or 1 to 15 work rest ratio. I know right now, if I did a sprint for, let's say, 10 seconds flat out for a group of 60 semi-professional athletes, getting them to sit around the next 150 seconds after that is going to be an absolute nightmare. There's no chance. Like they're going to go wild. Even if you do a walk back recovery after 10 seconds, they'll still be sitting there for another 100 seconds thinking like, what am I doing? Like this is silly. Like that's wonderful in a lab and an institute-based setting, but how can you manipulate, adapt, and find what is the most effective dose in a semi-elite or a grassroots level, or in an environment where you've got 60 athletes that are there to sort of take whatever rope you give them as well. Say, for example, you might have a perfect gym session set up, ready to go, and you get to a gym and the gym has 2 squat racks and you've got 40 blokes that are lining up. They've got back squats. So how do you quickly manipulate and adapt? And that comes out to the art. If you don't have the art, you're sitting there thinking, oh my God, I'm not going to have my squats in today. I don't know what I'm going to do. If you've got the art, it'd be better, potentially you could do a leg press, or there's different variations of squats you can undertake. Maybe we don't have to do squats today. We can dose that into our programming later. Like there's lots of different ways you can work through as well. So, I definitely value the art a lot more than the science, but you do definitely always need the science base to it. But that part doesn't work if you don't have this part sort of as the foundation.
Yeah, I almost feel like the quote of Mike Tyson, like everyone's got a plan till they're punched in the face. It's and it's that punch in the face that you see for S&Cs. I mean, as an athlete, what you're saying there is that you don't have to be perfect. You can be imperfect. You can have an imperfect program and still get good results, which I think is so right. And the funny thing you see is whether it's an intern or a fresh S&C coming in trying to make their mark into a team, that they will sometimes walk in, and especially if they haven't been in the industry for very long, is that the athletes themselves are massively imperfect. They're not every player, very rarely is every player wanting to do the S&C stuff. Sometimes they want to be on court, they want to be out in the field, they want to be in the training facility actually, like hitting balls or throwing balls or on the range, whatever it might be. There's very few that are truly, or probably increasing, but to be the ones that are like wildly dedicated to that aspect, it's not 100%. It's just not 100% of people. And I think one of the big aspects that I believe should be considerably added into the qualification process is how you embark yourself upon a culture in a team. And so me going through my performance psychology masters right now, while the academics and the literature is wonderful, if I was to only go in there and focus on that and not actually think about how I was connecting with people when I'm actually coaching, that it's almost irrelevant. It becomes pointless. And I think the same being with S&C coaches, physios as well, I would throw into this one, is that you've got to be a part of the culture. You can be driving the culture more often than not, because sometimes the actual head coaches are so immersed in the performance on the field that they sometimes can forget about the culture off the field. And my best mate, Luke Wells at Lancashire, gave me a massive insight into that dressing room about how the culture is driven. And he would say that you would think it's some of the players here and this player here and this hero of the team over here and has played for X amount of years. It's like the physio. Physio is one of the most integral cogs in their culture at the moment. And that for me is so amazing to see that they will allow that physio to have a part and have a say in what the culture of the team is off field, because they're quite literally immersed in it. And I think I've seen S&C coaches that pull from that culture because they don't understand the imperfect and idiosyncratic world that really is professional sport, that it is messy, it is ugly, people are taping themselves up, they're not doing the perfect reps, they haven't got great form, sometimes they don't want to be in the gym, whatever it might be. And the ones that pull away from that and don't agree with it, they seem to struggle. They isolate themselves, definitely, whereas actually embracing the culture, being an integral cog of it, wow, it's game-changing.
Well, for those who are in the industry, you need to go and follow a guy called Shane Lahane, or at least listen to some of the podcasts and some of the presentations he's done. He's unbelievable, and it's funny. The more and more I listen to Shane, the more I question myself and some of my practices, because the way that he thinks about our role as an S&C coach is just, I think, is revolutionary.
What sort of questions does he ask of you then? Yeah,
so no, he's the thing I call him a physical performance coach at the Sydney Swans. So AFL over here, top level Sydney, super successful club. They're in the grand final last year. He has a rugby background, but he sort of, I was even listening to a podcast with him yesterday, and lucky enough to know him and have done my ASCA level 3 with him. But he will say things like, well, actually, I don't consider myself as a physical performance or an S&C coach. I think of myself as a football coach who looks after the physical of the program, just as if there's a football coach who looks after the forward line, the offensive crew, and then defensive crew. Because really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, to an extent, yes, it does, but really we're trying to improve performance on field. Everything that we do must underpin performance on field. So for some people, that might mean not jumping into the gym with me. Maybe their physical competencies are there, they're really strong already, but where they're lacking in their game is ground balls or taking overhead marks. So actually you can have the gym session off and go with one of the line coaches, or maybe you're struggling psychologically, so you're heading off to this person here. How can we be, yes, absolutely nail the fundamentals, but also understanding that every movement or something that we do in the gym must tie back to how we want to play football at the end of the day. So there's just lots of those sort of philosophy. So he sort of counts himself as an assistant coach, which is pretty rare in the S&C realm. He'll sit at all of the sort of board meetings for selections and all those sorts of things to have a greater understanding as to how he can make his program better in order to better serve the overall football program, as opposed to just thinking about his little niche of S&C over here. So no, he's really, really almost like philosophical. I love listening to him. But he's saying, as I said, just making me question. I'm doing it all wrong. I need to be doing it like this. So that's where the evolution continues to come from, So I love hearing from him. And he's somebody as well who says he actually stopped himself going on podcasts for a long period of time because he tries to evolve so frequently. He didn't want to have to listen to himself back on record and saying, I'm doing this sort of program at this point in time, because he knew that it was going to be different 2 or 3 years later. So I've just got a lot of respect for him.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. You also got to have an organisation that's willing to bring you in like that. I don't know whether he's sort of asking himself to be in those rooms to better understand, which would be a really interesting thing to know. Is he asking to be in those rooms so I can get a much more holistic view of the whole athlete experience that's going on here, or whether he's being asked to come in after having shown the care and the culture, the values, the behaviours that they seem to adopt him. Be an interesting one to know.
I might be speaking out of line here, but this is just what I can assume from what I've heard. I haven't asked him this personally, but from what I can assume that he maybe had more of that pull in a rugby setting, because I guess the physical competency component of rugby probably had a greater contribution to the overall program. So I can't remember exactly which clubs he was involved with, but it was certainly across the ditches, sort of more towards your end of the world. So he was very, very heavily involved in decision making and outlay of training sessions and those sorts of things. And I think the club received it really well when he brought those same philosophies into an AFL environment and utilised the terminology that he did to say, I'm an assistant coach and this is a football program and those sorts of things. I think that was very well received by his peers, and maybe there's a bit of a middle ground. Maybe certainly they would have been open to it. Maybe he's come with a few more ideas that they might not have considered without his input.
Yeah.
That's just an assumption.
Yeah. So speaking of philosophies, your one is closing the gap between local and elite, which I love. And again, if anyone goes and follows your socials, PEAQ online, you can quite literally see anyone from a mum, a fun runner, to a full professional team working out in the same gym at the same time. And this idea of closing the gap between local and elite, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. And admittedly, I think I started Sprig 8 years ago, and I can't really remember its very inception. I don't remember this spark. But I guess from my point of view, I've always been of the opinion that you can manipulate and adapt the principles that are used at the very top level and make them appropriate to any age, gender, outcomes, goals. All it is doing essentially is providing you a framework of purpose with your training. Although a lot of group training studios are great, we talked about before the fact that you can have non-perfect but consistent programming. If an F45 studio works for you and you can do it consistently, that's great. But probably what I would argue is that you can have a much more purposeful approach in which you have undulation of the types of training sessions you do, for example. So as opposed to just doing hit every single day, which is what a lot of these studios do, for example, you might have 2 or 3 days of hit or high intensity or conditioning training where you get the heart rate up and your intent is to burn calories or whatever it might be. But then have another 2 or 3 days in which you slow it down, you're more purposeful with your approach, you focus on time and attention or load lifted or volume and those sorts of things too. Essentially, that sort of theory of periodization is manipulated from how we program for our athletes at the top. Same again in terms of exercise selection. For the most part, I would say if we're talking about just the meat and potatoes, and we've obviously mentioned earlier in this podcast about diversifying this a bit more depending on the population you're working with. For the most part, really, I would argue that the foundation of most programs from a lower body perspective would be squat, hinge, lunge, and thrust. Around those, you can build some accessories of some knee dominant hamstrings, some calves, some groin, some lateral hip, and those things. From an upper body perspective, people generalize with push and pull, but I would argue that a horizontal push is very different to a vertical push. And similarly, a horizontal pull is very different to a vertical pull. So we incorporate all 4 of those. And then from a trunk perspective, you get people, doing sit-ups and those sorts of things. I'd probably say from a functionality and human movement perspective, we like to do or add in bracing of some, so there might be pallet holds, planking, whatever it might be, and then rotations, landmine twists and cable wood chops and those sorts of things too. So squat, hinge, lunge, thrust, push, pull vertically and horizontally, and then brace and rotate. That's sort of the 10. And that's the 10 movement patterns that I presented on when I went over to Nottingham and talked to the UK SCA. So again, that exercise selection can absolutely be manipulated for a mum or a 10-year-old kid that comes through. The kid could be doing a bodyweight squat. The mum could be doing a goblet squat. And Lewis Hatchett comes in and is doing a barbell Bulgarian squat with chains on the end and, whatever it might be. It's just like a continuum of exercises. We're still doing the same movement, but it's just different level of difficulty based on the nature of the load that you have, based on are you working bilaterally or in a split stance or unilaterally, and how much range of motion or time and attention are you utilizing. So certainly that's my philosophy, is that those you can literally work up and down the chain. It can be appropriate to periodize your training no matter what you're doing. And the other thing as well, just from a moral perspective, to be honest with you, I found a couple of things. So number one would be like some performance facilities almost have sort of like an elitist feel or promotion to it. I know recently there was a guy over here, I won't name names, but released a video to say, are you sick of working out next to mums and bodybuilders? Come to my gym. What about athletes that are mums as well? Over here in Australia, and this might not be, relevant to you guys over there, but we've got a woman named Erin Phillips who represented Australia for basketball, and now she's the greatest of all time Australian women's footballer ever. Superstar. She's a mum of 4 kids. We've got Lauren Jackson, who is the greatest of all time basketballer, but she's a mum as well. So you can actually be both too. It's like, and it was great because people blew up that guy's video, which is, I just tend to stay out of those things, but I did enjoy reading some of the comments and people ripping into him. But why be so elitist? Like, why? Yes, absolutely, it's cool and entertaining to work with people that are athletic, but why is that better or worse? Why is Lewis Hatchett, the athlete, better than Lewis Hatchett, the podcast entrepreneur? There's no difference. So why would I then think that I'm a better coach because I'm working with Erin Phillips as opposed to working with a mum who has to squeeze in training between making food for her kids, dropping her kids off at school, quickly whipping into work a part-time job, picking the kids back up again, like cleaning the house. It's wild. What these people do is actually incredible. Sorry to ramble on.
Mate, no. So I think one thing I pick up on that is the fact that, again, having been in your gym, and there's something I want to get onto, but just on this topic, is that I think people both ends can learn from each other from there. So again, my experience recently going back into the gym is that this morning was a fella in there who is, I'm going to say, into his 70s, and he looks like a father. He's farm strong. He is loading up the bar more than what I would put on there, and pulling weights that are bigger than what I would pull. And it isn't the fact that I'm not looking at him going, I want the form that he's got because he's doing it in a wild way, and I'm letting him get crack on with that. But for me, it's actually, this is just a fella who's taking his body, his fitness, his health into his own hands. This is someone who's, even at his age, who could easily throw down a bunch of excuses as reasons not to go to the gym. He's turning up every morning and he's doing it. That's inspiring. And whether you are a mum or an elite athlete, you can be inspired by both. And I actually have this belief that elite athletes should hang around amateurs more, because I think you can not only learn from them, but you can actually inspire them. And there's another thing that comes with it, is that when you're around people that are almost looking up to you and maybe trying to chase you, that makes you work harder. It makes you focus a little bit more. I really want to run training sessions with some pro teams where you put them under the pump a little bit by bringing in school kids to come and watch them. And 2 things happen at the same time, is that you get the school kids that get to watch this training session and watch their heroes play, but also the players, consciously or unconsciously, are going to have to switch on because they have got eyes literally on them. They don't really, that the whole sort of, I don't want to mess this up is going to be with them. They're not going to take it easy. They've actually got pressure on them a little bit more. And I think it works both ways. And so what you've created, where you've got both ends of that, is incredible, and both ends can learn from each other. From when I was there, you had a lot of young kids coming in who had aspirations to be athletes, professional athletes in whatever realm that was. You had a lot of AFL coming in. You're obviously in lacrosse and basketball. Are you in netball as well?
To a looser extent, we definitely also send coaches out to work with teams. So we have a couple on the books at the moment, but I've probably stepped away from working with them exclusively, particularly as well now. Jamie, my wife, she's back. She's dusted talking about being an athlete and a mum. She's actually going back to play at the highest level of netball that she's ever played in her life. So she's going to Premier League, which is sort of the one step down from our national competition. So fingers crossed she goes well. So I thought I would leave her to her own devices because she doesn't listen to any of my advice anyway.
So my point being is, you have these athletes, you have a lot of athletes that come to you that want to move to being a professional. They want to train like it. And so what are some of the attributes, and I don't say physical because they can be different depending on the individual, and there's no one size fits all. What are some of the characteristics that you potentially think work really well in a young person that wants to transition to having the capacity, motivation, discipline to being an elite athlete?
It's going to sound boring, but number one is consistency. Just like, does that person have the ability to rock up time and time again? If you're a swimmer, can you get up at 5 a.m. 3 times, 4 times per week and stare at that line at the bottom of the pool and just keep ticking away and try to shave off milliseconds off of your time? Do you have the ability to do that? I see a lot of people that come in with massive spurts of motivation or enthusiasm, and then in 6 weeks' time they're burnt out and like, nah, I'm done, I'm going to go do something else, and they sort of ebb and flow, and it just doesn't ever work. So consistency, as boring as it is, and this is something I pump on my socials as well, is probably an attribute that we're losing as humanity, because we're in a world at the moment where we get so much instant gratification through social media, and you get your notifications, you get your little burst of dopamine, and you open up your phone, and you've got 100 people like your status on your post, and you're pumped up, and people want that sort of instant reward. Whereas I think long-term success requires just some grind. And that, often, and again, there's another video I did on this as well. I think about this in business. I see a lot of people in business who they're in it for 2 years, and if it doesn't work out, they drop out and do something else. They start another business, where I've seen people be in business for 10 years, like this. And all of a sudden something happens, something goes viral, or you get a big contract, and then it's bang. Look, something about our culture changes, and all of a sudden what they're doing is cool. It's like, so consistency. Again, I'll sort of slightly diverge there. This is going to be a bit of a controversial one, probably for your best top end athletes. And I want to say this with a pinch of salt almost, is I think almost a controlled arrogance to an extent. And what I mean by that is, you don't be going around pumping your chest out and saying like, geez, how good am I? Like, that arrogance goes too far, and people get sick of you, and the pressure, and often those people implode. But I think when I say a controlled arrogance, is like, you don't go around pumping that out, but you know how good you are internally. I think that sort of mindset of it, and we sort of talked about having a bit of a harder edge before we actually started recording the podcast. I think that gives a little bit of X factor. I think if you have an athlete who doubts themselves, then actually it's detrimental to their performance. So, as we've seen probably many times, there's many a time where I've seen, let's say, a more physically competent athlete, or a more skillful athlete who doubts themselves, who doesn't get the most out of themselves and doesn't perform well, as opposed to somebody who I don't think is as physically competent or isn't as skillful, but just has this somewhat of a controlled arrogance in their mindset, and they find a way to have a wonderful career and earn the top accolades and those sort of things as well. So consistency, some form of controlled arrogance, or at least strong belief in what you can bring to the field. You go out in the field knowing that you are the best, or you're in the top 3 best players, and you can tear this game apart if you want to. And then I think having diversity. So let's say, for example, from like a young athlete perspective, having a diverse skill set. So that might look like trying lots of different sports, so that you develop lots of different physical capacities and develop lots of different coordination sets, as opposed to highly individualizing yourself from early stages. So that leads to pretty intense burnout and a lack of diversification of your skills and capacities. Or maybe if that's not it, maybe at least having some form of get away outside of the sport you have. So maybe Lewis loves surfing outside of this, and fishing or something like that. Having something diverse, because I see again too many times where you have really skillful or really competent athletes that just get thrown into this pressure cooker, and then they have nothing outside of sport. So they put their whole entire being, their whole entire their purpose, their value, their self-value on how they perform on the weekend. and that can become, just this. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this as an athlete. And I know some coaches do experience that as well. They put their entire being on how a team is performing in that time. So yeah, those are probably the three things: consistency, some form of controlled arrogance or belief, I think, and then diversifying yourself outside of the sport that you're in.
That diversifying is a really interesting one, and you see it as a common thread in highly elite athletes that have had diversification early on in their careers. There are also people that specialize, like your Tiger Woods is. They just really like went in on one. But how do you find it when perhaps someone is doing many different things, but they might have a goal on one sport? I'll give you an example. Young lad wants to make it as a professional cricketer, but wants to also play his rugby, wants to also play his basketball. And I was chatting with an academy director at a Premier League rugby club here in the UK, and he actually still allows some of his academy players who are 18 to go and play many different sports. And
that's amazing, by the way.
It is really interesting. Yeah, really interesting, especially at rugby, because they're so hot on physical, so hot on the recovery, the hits, the movement, the time on task. Now, they're not got the time on task that a pro will have, and they're not taking the hits that a pro will have because they have to be careful. But the one with this example of a young lad trying to become a cricketer, wants to play basketball, wants to play rugby, it's a tough one for me. I tussle with it sometimes. I really understand why it's beneficial, but also I say, well, what stage? What's your priority list? And I think that for me is understanding what your priority list is. Am I playing a basketball game here that I'm running myself into the ground, and I'm so tired that the next morning I can't get up and go to the gym that I know I need to do in order to get towards the goal of being a pro cricketer?
Yeah, I think you nailed it there, and that was probably going to be my word of advice would be sit down. What you have to do with that person is create a priority list and almost give it a rating of 1 to 10 or give it a percentage out of 100. Okay, well, cricket is 70%. That's where we're going to put most of our eggs in that basket. Then surfing, okay, like 10%, so that's important, but I understand that only needs to be a small aspect of my week. And then rugby, okay, I do really love that, maybe 15% or whatever it is. So if you can, try to put a sort of a number of priority to what it is, and then let that help you to dictate. You talk about time on task. Well, does your time on task represent the priority and its percentage at that point in time? If it doesn't, then maybe you need to readjust your schedule. And then it might be a little bit of, playing around where there might be some trial and error. Okay, actually, I've probably put too much time into rugby. Let's draw that back a little bit. So I'm going to talk to my rugby coaches. Hey, coach, I'm a real good chance of going a fair way in my cricket here. Any chance I can have one of these training sessions off per week, or can I go to a more casual or local club for your rugby, which requires you to just rock up and play on the weekend, for example, or can you go play social basketball as opposed to having it do 2 training sessions on top of what you're doing? So I think it's really clearly identifying what's your priorities. Can you, if possible, put some form of objectivity next to that? And then does that align with what you're undertaking on a week-to-week basis? And once you've figured those things out, then you can play with it and say, well, this is working, this is not working, this is perfect, I've got a great balance on it. Actually, I'm feeling really burnt out. Like, we've put cricket as 80%. I think if I keep doing this, that I'm going to implode mentally, and trying to catch up anything psychologically is a lot more challenging than trying to catch up physical capacity. So let's maybe just pull that back a little bit and talk to the coach. I'm sure most modern day coaches now would have some form of at least understanding when it comes to mental health and wellness and those sorts of things too. So that would be my suggestion. Whether that's perfect or not is another. That's the art. That's what we've got to figure out.
Yeah, I really like what you said about the controlled arrogance as well. I likened it to having your controlled ego. That you've got this ego about you and a belief that I deserve to be here. And one of my favourite things actually was Kyle Hooper, who's actually over there in Adelaide, West Indies cricket legend, was one of my coaches. And I remember sitting with Carl, talking to him about his upbringing and his time in being in a test cricketer and legend of the game. And I said, like, what made you stand out in an era when everyone was really good? You had people chasing your tail. There was people that were incredible. And he just said, I deposited more hard work. And he said, every time I would get up and go running with Brian Lara, or every moment I was in the nets, or every time I was trying hard doing something, he said, I was depositing work so that then when I came up against an opposition, I fought for it that bit harder because I deep down knew I'd earned the right to be there, rather than if I hadn't deposited that work, you still subconsciously know you haven't done that hard work. Therefore, the person that you're facing, your opposition, there's a chance that you might break first because you think they've probably done more work than me. I know I haven't really done that work. And I listened to that and I was like, nailed it, Carl. Like, you've just, that is it.
Keep putting those fitness deposits in the bank, mate. I love it. That's good. Give a bit of interest on as well. That'd be nice. Interest rates are high over here at the moment.
How do you keep someone being consistent then? It's one of the biggest things that people will find with their training. What have you found are ways in which people can stay consistent with their training?
Look, there's many different ways you can. And again, it can be, without sort of sound like a broken record, that can be quite individualized depending on the person. So you need to get a read as to how they're motivated. Is it by achieving small little mini targets and goals across? So as opposed to saying, hey, look, you're 15 right now and our goal is for you to get drafted at 18 years old. That 15-year-old is thinking 3 years is a bloody long time. So what are some mini goals we can hit now? Is it something physical? So we're trying to increase your power rate ratio on the force platforms. We're going to try to do that in this off season. Is it something like we're going to try to get you selected for a state representative this year? Is it we're going to try to get your 20-meter sprint as close to 3 seconds as possible, because we know that in 3 years' time, they'll be looking at that as one of your physiological metrics when they go through the draft camp testing. So little mini goals is one of the things that I would say is one of the more commonly used. Then it's things like, I guess, just engagement during training. Can you find a way to add a little bit of spice? I like to sprinkle in a little tiny bit of variety. It's that sort of that balance. Like, you don't want to train too randomly that you're just getting random results, but also not just the same thing. So say, for example, and I'm happy to share this here, there's no secrets, and I have people under my own roof at PEAQ who have differing opinions. So if I write a program for Lewis, if you are undertaking the program by yourself, you'll go through with the scientific sets, reps, and rest times. So you'll go from A to B, and you'll have a 2-minute rest, and that's it. You're all good. And then you go A to B, 2-minute rest. And A to B, you do your program. When people come in to see me, maybe they've paid a premium price potentially to come and do a one-on-one session. We'll still work through our superset, but maybe in our rest time, we're practicing a skill. We're doing something creative to try to keep the person engaged. So one of the reasons, among many, that we installed a proper NBL basketball ring right in the middle of our gym is so that we can spread out our rest creatively. I always thought of it that way, but also I always felt guilty. Like, if, for example, you're paying me, let's say $100 for a one-on-one session, then I was subconscious if we're like sitting down for a 2 or 3 minute rest, which scientifically, right, you're thinking, mate, I'm sitting down for like 30% of our session here. I'm literally paying, $40 to sit down and do nothing. Where scientifically and physiologically, that's actually a great outcome. But for the person who's paying money to be, for your time, they're thinking themselves, well, what am I getting out of this too? So we might practice juggling in between. We might do free throws, even if they're ultimate frisbee athlete or lacrosse athlete, whatever it might be. I might say, hey, here's 2 balls. Can you bounce them both at the same time? Now can you go one at a time? Now can you walk and do just things like that. So I like to add a bit of variety into those, because they can go and do their training session and stick to their rest times, whatever. It's just a lot harder to write in a program. I want to do a back squat, a hand clean, and then dribble 2 balls at the same time.
Yeah, mate, I love that. That's such a good outlook. Jeez, we've been going a while here, so it's flying.
I'm just very conscious of the time of
day it is for you over there right now.
That's right.
Let's come towards the end here, and you're moving into your new facility, or it's being constructed right now. Where's it at?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so it's almost built. We're pretty close. I think we'll be operational by March. So at the moment, the walls are up, the floor's down, the roof is on, the mezzanine level's up. It's exciting. They've just started the internals. But we are very dependent on our tradesmen working over the Christmas period. So traditionally over here in Australia, they might knock off on the 10th of December and then come back on Australia Day, which is on the 26th of Jan. So they'll be gone for a long time. They go to their houses off in Bondi on the East Coast. But no, we're really, really excited. I guess we looked at, so where Lewis worked and where we currently operate out of is a 400 square meter facility. We looked, when we had filled that space, which we're very grateful that happened pretty organically, we thought to ourselves, well, what does expansion look like? We didn't want to just turn into another chain. There's lots of chain gyms and franchises over here. And we thought, I guess, moving into multiple locations, you spread your resources, you maybe potentially lose that community feel. I didn't want to have a facility where I still can come in and know everybody's name and say good day and sort of keep my finger in the pie. So we said, let's not go to multiple locations, but let's just build a bigger space. So this next space will be 1,550 square meters, which we're super excited about. So it was
3 times the size.
1,200 squares on the bottom floor. We'll have 200 square mezzanine level, and then there's 150 squares outside as well. Super excited, very grateful, definitely scary as well. And I guess one of the things that we are allowed to sort of speak about now as well, we're just in the final stages. We haven't sort of officially promoted this online. I hinted this in one of the podcasts I did for Athletics Authority as well. We're in the very, very final stages of just changing our business structure because we are having 2 reasonably high-profile investors jump on board as well, which is exciting. So a guy called Greg Stafford, he's based over on the East Coast. He's very entrenched in the Australian rules football world. So he's the forward line coach for the Melbourne Football Club. He played 200 games himself and has a really strong sort of foundational business knowledge. And then from a forward-facing perspective, a guy called Darren Burgess. Potentially some of your listeners might be familiar with Burjo. So he originally grew up in Sydney. He then sort of took over the reins at the Port Adelaide Football Club in the AFL. From there, he transitioned. His love was always soccer or football, or whatever you guys would like to call it.
How dare you?
He worked with the Socceroos. He wanted to work with Liverpool. So whenever we Zoom him, he's got his Gerrard signed shirt in the background. He came back and worked in Australia for a little while, and then bounced back over to the UK and worked with Arsenal under Arsene Wenger for a period of time, and then under Unai Emery for a little while as well. He's sort of circled back around and is now the high performance manager of the Adelaide Footy Club. But yeah, he's going to be a business partner of ours, which we're so excited about. He's sort of like the GOAT of our industry. I'll sort of refer to him as, and I think it's going to bring a lot of spotlight and hopefully, for example, maybe we can draw on him and get Liverpool over for a training camp or something like that. We'll see.
Oh mate, that would be unbelievable. That having a facility that people get drawn to from other sports and just being sort of known as a location where they can get good quality facility. Are you going to do basketball court in there, or are you throwing in another sport court as well?
Yeah, we played around with a few different models. We did look at a full court at one point in time, but it takes up a pretty big footprint, and we didn't want to turn it into a rec center as opposed to a gym. So we have a full half court, of which we'll have the rings. On sort of, if you think about like if this way is the basketball court, it's going to be sort of encompassed in a cage. So we have a cage this way, and the idea we're just sort of fleshing it out at the moment is that we have sort of like inbuilt indoor soccer goals in the fencing, so that you can play indoor soccer one way and play basketball the opposite way. We'll go with like a bit of like a FIBA 3v3 sort of rubber flooring as opposed to like a hardwood timber, just so it's a bit more versatile. Outdoor space is still yet to be determined, so we might use that for some different bits and pieces as well. But we're definitely going for multi-sport, so that again we appeal to lots of different demographics, but also so that we can expose people to lots of different sports and skills as well.
Mate, it's incredible what you're doing. And look, as we wrap this up, I think from a personal note, it's so inspiring to see where you've come from to what you're doing. Someone that was in the industry, wanted to go out on their own, but you've done it in such a way that your community is so tight with you, and it's down to how you have treated them. It really is. I mean, even your in-laws. I mean, Kim and Robert, just like legends.
Yeah, and I guess most people clash with their in-laws, but I love mine dearly. So we've got a great family support network. I'm very grateful.
And it's true, like how you, Jamie, everyone has welcomed people in there, and it stems from just your enthusiasm and your willingness to help. You sent me a message, and you don't realize how much of an impact this actually had. Was I reached out to you about the Mindstrong Sport app and what I was up to, and you said, mate, yeah, I'll have a look, thank you so much. But the question you said back to me is it's such a powerful message. You said to me, is there any way we can support you at all? That message needs to be sent to more people. Like, more people need to be sending that to each other, because it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. I'm completely isolated in my work and what I'm doing. And having that support is something that you crave and you really need. And there's so many people out there that don't have it. And I think the fact that you're just so willing to give it, that it has come back to you, and you're now sort of reaping that benefit through what you're building and the community you've got. So from personally, thank you so much for just asking that question and creating the space that you do for me, everyone else around you.
Thanks, mate. That means the world. And I guess, a lot of that stems from being grateful for the support that I've had, throughout my journey, whether it's through my parents and family, through Jamie, or we mentioned the in-laws, through the amazing community. We opened up PEAQ for 5 years ago now with no idea and no members. And it's really been built off the back of word of mouth and, as you said, community and people just coming to a space where they feel safe and heard and those sort of things too. So we couldn't do what we do without those people. And I guess whenever I get the opportunity, I want to try to pay it back. And I'm inspired by people like yourself who are out there and inspiring change and spreading great messages. And those people that are jumping into business, I always want to be their biggest advocate, because I know that it's not easy. It's not easy trying to change people's mind on things, or not easy trying to figure out taxes and logistics and all those sorts of things, security and whatever it might be. So certainly I'm far from an expert in any of those areas, but I'll always try to help where we can. So I really appreciate this time, mate. That means a lot. And mate, I'm always here if you need me. But just promise you don't forget about us small people when you take over the world.
Don't be silly. Two final things I always like to leave people with is there anything that you're currently reading, watching, listening to that's inspiring you at the moment that you would recommend to people? That could be a book, documentary, quote, anything.
Yeah, it's funny. Not many people know, because I guess I don't talk about it too much, but I do read a lot about manifestation and The Secret and all those sorts of things. So I'm not somebody who outwardly promotes it and sort of, I don't know. It's funny, sort of to be completely honest with you. Sometimes, let's say for example in a sporting or a football environment, there maybe is an awareness that it might not be everybody's cup of tea, and they might go, "What's that fluffy bullshit? That's like airy fairy. Like that's not. You can't just like imagine that you're gonna own a house overlooking the ocean and whatever it might be." But certainly, I strongly believe in all those sorts of things, and there've been lots of instances in which you have gone through readings or listened to podcasts or meditations or whatever it is. Things have happened after those things pretty immediately. Is it because I'm just more aware of it? Potentially. But I do think there's so much more up here that we can unlock. So probably all those classic things like manifestation, The Secret, The Power, all those, all those bits and pieces. There was, high performance habits. So I'll have those self-help, self-improvement books. They're probably the main ones. And was there another question off the back of that?
Yeah, I'm gonna come into that one. So one thing I'd lead on that is have you what you've got right now? Did you manifest it?
But yeah, for sure, absolutely,
Love it.
I would say 100%.
I love that. So then the last thing I want to leave people with is there a challenge that you would set people from the conversation that we've had? What would be a challenge you would like to set people from this conversation?
Could be dependent on the listener. So if it is an S&C coach, for example, my challenge would be to be as open-minded and continue to develop yourself as much as possible. So set yourself a challenge of listening to one podcast and reading one article every single week, something like those, along those lines, so that you'll always take in more information. If you are the young developing athlete who wants to become a professional athlete that we talked about, work on your consistency, work on building your belief, work on your physical competencies that you need to, and continue to diversify yourself, as we sort of talked about in our discussion so far. And yeah, probably that sort of carries across if you're just a general gym goer who wants to make a change in your life. As boring as and as simplistic as it is, like, just be consistent. Don't feel like you have to break world records every single week. Don't feel like in your first week of your gym membership you need to go 7 times that week. Like, just go 2 or 3 times. It's okay, and then go 2 or 3 times. Like, don't put yourself in a hole so that you deter yourself from going the week after that. So probably a few different takeaways depending on what you want to achieve by listening to this podcast.
Mate, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and for coming on and just generally catching up with you, and for you to give your time and your expertise and your thoughts. I've loved watching your journey, and I'm no doubt I'm going to be coming back.
Appreciate you, great man. Thanks for the opportunity. And yeah, if there's anybody who has any questions or whatever, just reach out. I still write back to our socials. I can't quite let go of it just yet. So feel free to reach out, and always here to help where necessary.
I'll be dropping all the social links and places to find you in the show notes. So yeah, thanks again, mate.
Thanks, mate.